Okay, hey, happy Halloween. Let's not beat around the bush since the first minute of a video is usually useless and I'm guessing you can read the title, so let me just bullet points this for you. This is a top 10 list of the spooky scariest moments from my own personal video game history, and for the sake of a more interesting list, we're omitting horror games, and I'm also confining my choices to games I played as a kid, so anything 17 and under. If you're looking for the piano from Mario 64, he's not here. I mean, do you really take me as that basic? That's it, that's the whole intro. Now let's take a look at just how easy it was to frighten me. Number 10. Bowser is kind of interesting to me in that within the Mario universe, he's clearly meant to be an imposing, scary figure, at least in the main platformer titles. The horns, the teeth, the spiky shell, the physique, he can breathe fire and bench press Nintendo's stockpile of unsold Wii U's. He can enter a room and clear it faster than I do when I show up at parties. Not because I'm scary. Well, I am the same color and weight as Abu. Not that one, that one. Point is, the residents of the Mushroom Kingdom tremble at the sight of the Bowser flag, family name, and auto group. And yet, I and no one I've met ever actually found him scary, and to be sure, that's definitely an intentional choice on Nintendo's part. He's scary in theory, but a big oaf in execution. He's designed to be recognizable as the bad guy, but not made so intimidating that the target demographic is put off by him. Overall, a pretty cuddly warlord, all things considered. So in Super Smash Bros. Melee, they just cranked it all up to 11. Giga Bowser is a semi-secret boss that you can fight by clearing adventure mode under certain conditions. A normal adventure mode run will end with you fighting and defeating a regular, albeit slightly chunkier Bowser, but if you met the criteria, Bowser's trophy will return from the void, get struck by lightning, and then transform into this eldritch kaiju monster complete with glowing eyes that say, "I'm gonna kill you real hard right now." Giga Bowser must be what the characters in the Mario games are seeing normally, because as a kid he had me sounding like a toad with severe abdominal pain. I didn't even know what Giga meant at the time, even the word was cause for concern. I just assumed it meant the big die. I remember specifically avoiding fulfilling the criteria of beating adventure on normal or higher within 18 minutes because I lacked the fortitude to square off against this abomination. Of course, one day I finally vanquished him so I could claim the Giga Bowser trophy, which is a huge milestone for a growing boy. You can't hurt me in doll form, Big Die Bowser. Number 9. This next entry is going to kick off something of a recurring theme when it comes to things in games that really heebed my jeebies. In most scenarios, especially as a kid, I've hated being chased or stalked in video games, and this list is going to be reflective of that. I figured the gut reaction can be pretty easily explained. There's probably something primal in humans that set off when being chased, dating back to days when we were still working our way up the food chain. That's why we took tags so seriously as kids, because it awoke an ancient preservationist urge in our DNA. Maybe that all transfers to video games. I also think there's something to the fact that video games typically empower the player. 9 times out of 10, your character is a badass in some shape or form who can easily dispatch common mooks, and even boss characters, while maybe more difficult, can still have their weaknesses exploited. But sometimes, like in Pac-Man World, you're faced with this indestructible force that cannot be harmed or bargained with. I'm referring to the first half of the Anubis Rex fight at the end of the second world. As a small aside, Pac-Man World is probably the most obscure game on the list, which is a shame because I think it's a pretty underrated PS1 platformer. It's also the first video game I ever played. It may not have aged as well as its more commonly recognized and praised sequel, but I still think it's worth a visit. Anyway, like I said, this is the second boss fight in the game, and a serious case of mood whiplash when juxtaposed to the first world and boss. The game kicks off with bright, sunny levels. It's all pretty lighthearted. Pac-Man's just catching some rays, enjoying the beach, ordering some strawberry daiquiris by the pool because he's secure in his Pac masculinity, and it's all topped off by a boss fight against this doofy old ship called the HMS Windbag, which is laughably easy. The next area, it's a little dark, some creepy spiders, some deadly lava, but nothing unmanageable. It's when we get to the last door in the world that the game stops joking around. You're probably still wearing your inner tube from the pirate levels, and that shit is about to get popped. Consider my timbers officially shivered. Before the boss fight proper, Pac-Man has to survive being chased down this hallway, which is made even scarier considering Pac-Man is not up to date on his tetanus shots. This all happens while being pursued by a mummified hand, and I think that's what really seals the deal for me. If we were seeing the whole ass mummy, I don't think this would have bothered me as a kid, but we're experiencing this chase more so from the perspective of the mummy rather than Pac-Man. It makes it so much more claustrophobic, and coupled with the growly, grunty noises the mummy is making, this whole shindig popped up in my childhood nightmares quite a few times. And then the actual boss fight is hard as fuck, which is the part I dread much more if I'm replaying the game nowadays.
Number 8.
I feel like this next one might be a bit more universal, and it taps into maybe the most insurmountable fear that humans have always and will always experience. Like, the music that plays when you're drowning in Sonic the Hedgehog is terrifying, but it's something the human race has only had to grapple with for 30 years, and thankfully we're evolving and figuring out ways to avoid it, like by making Sonic games that nobody would want to play. No, what I'm talking about is a monumental force that has been feared by man ever since man has been able to perceive it, and that is time.
Does the time bother you? I get bothered by the time.
Being timed in video games is pretty standard fare, and in most cases, it's not all that scary. Like, for example, I was never really bothered by having X amount of seconds to beat a level in any old school Mario games, even though the penalty is death. That's just the law of the land. And sure, you could argue that drowning in Sonic games is time-related, but you're also flooding a hedgehog's lungs with water, and that's kind of the primary focus there. I'm talking about scenarios where time itself is the enemy, and in this case, the entire premise of Pikmin fits that bill. Okay, and sure, the plot of the game involves escaping a planet so that Olimer's lungs aren't filled with oxygen, but it's a 30-day process, a really long drowning. I think for folks born a little earlier than me, Majora's Mask is sort of the predecessor for this pick, but it was a game I didn't personally grow up with due to lacking an N64. Had I owned it as a kid, I'm sure it would have been a lock for the similarly time-based gameplay structure with a terrifying face to put to the apocalypse to boot. Looks like me after reading YouTube comments. But at least with Majora's Mask, there were friendly faces to talk and barter with. In Pikmin, Olimer's stranded by himself on PNF-404. And sure, he can surround himself with up to 100 carrot slaves who were born to die, but oddly, I don't find myself comforted by their steely gaze. It doesn't help that I'm pretty sure they canonically want to abduct Olimer and process him into more Pikmin as soon as they get the chance. As uncomforting as I find the Pikmin, I do end up feeling ultimately responsible for them, and responsibility is something I'll run away from even faster than a first-person mummy hand. So, in the scenario where I accidentally wind up in a battle with a squad of Bulbaborbs with results that make General Custer feel pretty good about himself by comparison, coupled with the looming threat of suffocation as a product of my failure, yeah, color me spooked. This game is just pretty raw for a Nintendo outing. It never really tries to obfuscate how serious the stakes are and just how much of an incompetent asshole you are for leading your Pikmin to their doom. Like, anytime I didn't manage to get any Pikmin back to the ship by sundown and had to watch them defenselessly get eaten by predators, I had to set my controller down and question if maybe I should just play sports recreationally instead. And we're talking really, really close calls here. I did end up liking Pikmin 2 and 3 more than the original, mostly due to the general quality of life improvements and especially the cave system in 2, but I have to wonder if my preference is still skewed by how dire the situation is in the first game and how powerless it made me feel at times.
Number 7.
I hesitate to say that I have any shame left at this point in my life, but this next one is the entry on the list that I feel most personally embarrassed by. I just felt like I was too old to be scared of something in 2007's Super Paper Mario that released when I was 11, but YouTube has always been an exercise in honesty for me. For the record, I love this game. I think it's the last good Paper Mario game, though some folks say there's only 2 of those. But if you approach this game knowing it's not a turn-based RPG like its 2 predecessors, you might find its characters, and especially its story, to be some of the most engrossing stuff the Mario franchise has ever offered. Those of you who are familiar with it already know how dark the game is by Mario standards, and maybe you think you have my pick clocked. Could it be the ongoing apocalypse that threatens the worlds? Could it be the underworld level filled with dead people and those underwater hands that grab at you if you get too close? No, none of that. It's, this girl. I mean, let me explain. I can explain. This is Mimi. She's a henchwoman for Count Bleck, the game's main antagonist. In Chapter 2, she's working undercover as a maid in Merlee's mansion, where the last 3 levels of that world take place. Aside from literally running a slave labor operation, she seems fairly unspooky, although quick to anger. That is, until you reach the last portion of the chapter set in the mansion basement, during which the player is treated to this. Now, I'm not someone who would list spiders as a top fear of mine. I mean, I don't find them particularly pleasant, like I might verbally harass a family of spiders that moves in next door from afar, but I don't live in fear of them. But something about Spider fucking Mimi just really gets me. Even ignoring the crackly neck-turning and, for whatever reason, slot machine noises, I just find her design to be grotesque with the spindly, translucent legs, the, like, leftover hair appendage thing floating there, and for some reason, the texture, the whole game is stylized around paper, and to my knowledge, the series really leads into that in the later installments, but the crumpled paper effect here on her now eyeless face is somehow unnerving. Mind you, if a boss fight just kicked off right here and now, I don't think this is making the list, but they had to go and throw a goddamn chase sequence into the mix. This whole part takes place in this labyrinthian series of puzzly chambers with multiple entrances and exits, with Mimi constantly pursuing you through them until you work your way to the solution. Each time you enter a room, you get a few seconds of peace, but if you take too long, this creepy music kicks in and she teleports into the room, chasing after you until you either leave or die. She's also completely invincible, so no amount of social studies textbooks or spray bottles will save you from her arachnid wrath. I think part of the fear factor here is also the fact that when she shows up, the game doesn't center on her or give you a warning text box, and sometimes she's not even in sight when she pops in, but you know she's there and headed your way because of that music and the sound of her gross little legs tapping about. Once you navigate the chambers and nullify her invincibility for the boss fight, it stops being as scary, but I will admit the moments leading up to it were played in short bursts at high noon with maximum sunlight pouring into my bedroom.
Number 6.
Breaking the theme of scary stuff in games for kids, these next 3 entries are all from games that were assuredly for adults. They're all still outside the horror genre, but the next few are from M-rated games that I played while I was still solidly in that E10 plus to T range because my parents were cool. That being said, they were also wrong, and I shouldn't have been playing some of this shit. I mean, I don't know, I turned out okay, right? It's not like I've hyper-fixated on literally one media franchise intended for children and started trying to build a career off of it well into my mid-20s. It sounds well-adjusted to me! Number 6 comes from the first M-rated game I ever played, actually, which is 2007's Assassin's Creed. Yeah, so given that I was made to feel deeply unsafe by this actual green square during the same calendar year, maybe I shouldn't have graduated to overzealous neck stabbing so soon after, but hey, I don't have an animus, I can't change the past. As I just referenced, Assassin's Creed was pretty gnarly for how old I was, but it wasn't actually scary all that often. I remember feeling a little spooked by the faceless mannequin folk during the very beginning, but for most of its runtime, the game skews more gruesome than terrifying, if that makes sense. Fittingly, it wasn't until moments before the game's credits that I got to feeling truly unnerved. Really, it was the aftermath that this moment sparked that constitutes the core of the fear here. For some quick background, you play through most of the game as Altair, an ancestor of the kidnapped Nolan North copy-paste man Desmond Miles. But throughout the game, you get these segments where you play as Desmond and explore the little lab that you're confined to, where you get the opportunity to learn more about the organization that kidnapped you, Abstergo. It becomes apparent that Desmond isn't the first person who's been shoved into a machine and forced to play out the memories of his ancestors. In fact, the last guy who was here, Subject 16, suffered so greatly from the prolonged exposure to the Animus that he completely lost his mind and ultimately killed himself. But before he took his last breath, he decided to really stick it to the man by smearing just a shit ton of his blood all over the room. You can't see it for most of the game, given that Abstergo cleaned the place up for its new tenant, but due to synchronizing with his pseudo-superpowered ancestor, Desmond unlocks the ability to use eagle vision in the real world at the very end of the game. Thus, he's now able to see these cryptic crimson messages left by Subject 16. On its own and in the confines of the game, it's pretty tame if just slightly unsettling, but it really tapped into one of my long-standing childhood fears, which was the apocalypse and all things end of the world. Now, I don't fancy myself nihilistic or eager to kick the bucket, but Armageddon doesn't inspire the same type of fear in me like it used to. As a kid, I had this space book, and there was this section about the sun and how it's due to explode in a few billion years. This rapidly approaching reality was too much for my child brain to bear, so I took it upon myself to save humanity by simply throwing the book the fuck away. You're so very welcome. But if the sun messaged me on Discord and said, hey, I'm gonna get really big and envelop the earth and then blow up today, I'd be like, go for it, bitch. That just means I don't have to worry about taxes or dating anymore. But it took me a long while to get to this healthy place I'm in today. Throughout childhood, I was afraid of damn near anything that threatened humanity or the earth in an immediate way. I remember being scared of meteors, the Large Hadron Collider opening a black hole on the earth, the fucking rapture because this old guy and his group of merry men said it was gonna happen. I mean, that shit had me thinking about becoming born again. And that's saying a lot because the last time I went to church, I had water in my face and shit in my pants. But the big final boss of all those fears was the now quaint and folksy 2012 phenomenon. Remember that? Ironically, I was less and less scared of it the closer we got to December 21st, 2012, but that sweet spot of like 2007 to 2010 really had me worried. And naturally, Assassin's Creed built its entire first arc of games around said phenomenon, and these lovely drawings on the wall here introduced me to it. The glyphs themselves are mostly vaguely related mumbo-jumbo, but it was my deep dive into all sorts of internet nut-jobbery that really had me shook. I remember being so entranced and intrigued by all these symbols that I was up well into the night reading all about what they could mean. And the really neat thing about the internet, if you haven't noticed yet, is that people will just believe any old shit that they read on there, whether it's about Mayan calendars or government-mandated RFID chips or mysterious Planet X's. Wouldn't you believe a YouTube video that conveys life or death information through red Comic Sans set to the song from Requiem for a Dream? Cause not me. But listen, my excuse was being a kid. I'm glad I had the opportunity to buy into it and then realize it was garbage and get it all out of my system while I was young, because there are folks out there much older than 2007 Pat who still believe in all sorts of horse shit, like a flat earth or capitalism. Moving on.
Number 5.
Before number 5, here's a spooky bonus fact. Metal Gear Solid 4 was the first Metal Gear game I ever played. For any Kingdom Hearts fans who made it this far, this is like starting the series with KH3, but like specifically in the Keyblade Graveyard where nothing from the past is going to be explained to you because you frankly should have played everything before it. Because why wouldn't you? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because Solid Snake was in Super Smash Bros. Goddamn Brawl, so I wanted to play the newest game with this Solid Snake guy. He seemed pretty cool. He has a box. He likes to sneak around. I wonder what sort of zany hijinks he gets into, crawling around on the floor all silly. Laughing fucking octopus. Where to even begin? I mean, the entire premise of the character is terrifying enough. Laughing Octopus is one of 4 women with PTSD caused by the horrors of war, involuntarily plucked from different corners of the world to form the Beauty and the Beast Corps, a military unit fashioned with high-tech suits and the directive to kill Solid Snake by any means necessary. Some brainwashing from the big bads has them convinced that carrying out their mission can ease themselves of their past trauma, but the problem is that I'm playing a snake and I don't want to be shot at, so we're sort of at an impasse. Octopus is the first of the 4 that Snake runs into during the Solid Sun chapter set in South America, and I think it's easily way scarier than the following 3. It's really just the Anubis Rex and Mimi vibes again, but scaled up to be rated M for blood, crude humor, strong language, suggestive themes, and violence. And this time, as opposed to one long hallway or a series of rooms that gives you an occasional breather, this whole encounter takes place in a contained and claustrophobic research lab with a bunch of twists and turns and nooks and crannies. This really suits the fighting style of Laughing Octopus, the stealth specialist of the B&B Corps, as she picks different spots in the building to wait for Snake to stumble upon her, followed by attacking him while laughing like a maniac and scaring me beyond the point of shitlessness. The environment and music play huge parts in elevating this to a truly creepy encounter. The music is louder and more intense when Octopus is in sight, but after shooting her until she disappears in a cloud of ink, the music becomes more subdued but still super tense. As for the environment, Octopus employs all sorts of tricks to blend in, aided by her full-body camouflage suit. Sometimes she's just leaned up against a wall, but she'll also hide up in the rafters, pose as the anatomical model, or even mimic as different friendly characters. I always found myself more afraid when I couldn't see her, and it didn't help that her creepy laugh was echoing throughout the building, coupled with her just yelling Snake's name at random. She also drops the game's first fuck bomb in the cutscene before the battle, which I think is another way the game tries to communicate to you just how little she's effing around.
It's all so fucking hysterical!
It's one of the most tense moments in the series, and I'm easy prey when it comes to any sequence where I'm being watched or hunted by an unseen enemy. It doesn't get much worse than this. Dealing enough damage kicks off another cutscene that segues into the second phase of the fight, which is just her walking towards you and giving a big slimy hug if she gets too close until you put her down lethally or non. That cutscene does make her a bit more sympathetic by making her less violent and more apologetic, and it also throws in a gratuitous amount of butt shots. But it's going to take a little more than that to get me to sleep without the lights on for the rest of the month.
Number 4.
For number 4, we're going to yet another Metal Gear game that released earlier, but I played later because I was a real smart kid. Out of everything on the list, it's actually the game I first played most recently when I was 16. Having made the bright decision of playing the 4th installment of a series first, a few summers later I decided to embark on what is now known in the inner Pat lore as Metal Gear Week. My family was off on some vacation that I either declined to join or was simply not invited to, probably the latter, and I had the house to myself for 5 days alongside the Metal Gear Solid Legacy Collection on PS3. Skipping the first 2 MSX2 games, because of course I did, I got through the original Metal Gear Solid without incident, and the same could be said of MGS3 Snake Eater. But in the middle of them lies MGS2 Sons of Liberty. I should say I don't want to go into a ton of depth about this entry on a story level because for some reason I feel really gross about spoiling the 20-year-old Metal Gear Solid 2, which is weird because I just casually spoiled Assassin's Creed a few minutes ago, but the two are in completely different leagues. Like, I'm not breaking any new ground here, but MGS2 is one of the most artful games I've ever played, and although there are games on this list that I like more than it, I don't think any of them get close to the sophistication that MGS2 imparts. That is to say, you should really play it if you've been at all thinking about getting into the series, so I'm gonna tread lightly in terms of plot implications. But basically, you play most of the game as Raiden doing sneaky stuff aboard the Big Shell, a huge ocean cleanup facility thing. Throughout the entire game, as well as the previous one, you receive calls on your codec, where you get a ton of battle tips and story exposition from characters monitoring your mission back at HQ. It's almost always a good sign when you hear that codec noise go off because you're about to get some useful information or some fun character moments. This takes a disturbing turn when you reach the final portion of the game, Arsenal Gear. The area itself is not really any more or less scary than the rest of the game, with pretty normal environments and your typical bad guys trying to shoot you if you get spotted. If anything, the tension is actually eased a bit considering you're forced to play the first portion of it entirely naked. Usually I'd be more afraid when put in a situation where I'm defenseless, but Raiden is also doing naked and no-handed cartwheels while covering his junk and navigating areas titled the Ascending Colon. But whatever hee-hee-ha-has you've mustered up will quickly vaporize once you get your first codec call in here. On the other end of the calls is Colonel Campbell, who's been giving you strategic intel for both the first and second games, but upon entering Arsenal Gear, he seems different. At the start of the first call, it seems normal enough, albeit with some slight audio distortion, but the Colonel quickly starts getting oddly aggressive and dodges Raiden's questions as the latter realizes he's never actually met the Colonel in person. The call ends with a vague threat that a quote-unquote "we" have captured Rosemary, Raiden's love interest whom he'd also been talking to through the codec at various points throughout the game. And then shit really starts to hit the fan. The Colonel then proceeds to blow up Raiden's phone, and I guess I should clarify that's figurative and not literal given that it's Metal Gear, calling over and over and getting increasingly nonsensical with each call.
Even my patience has its limits. I just can't leave this thing up to you any longer. I'll do the fighting. You can just go home.
This will continue until you either get through the segment or exhaust all of the calls, and I think there's like more than 20 of them. You don't have to answer most of them, but it's sort of like a morbid curiosity. Like, you know it's gonna be some weird shit every time you pick up, but you gotta know. Now mind you, all of these Metal Gear games have these fourth wall breaking moments, but the ones here are the most creepily delivered by far. In the second call, the Colonel just straight up tells you to shut off the game console.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
Excuse me? As in my Sony PlayStation 3 that I am playing the video game on? He reassures Raiden, or the player, quite poorly that it's just a game, and then Rosemary hops on and tells me that I'm sitting too close to the TV, which I fucking was, and at this point it's sinking in that I should have gone on that vacation. And like, at the time I played this, I was 16, it's still a recent memory for me, and obviously I knew that this was not like a personalized copy of the game that was targeting me specifically, but it sure goddamn felt like it. And when the Colonel says a few calls later that I've been playing the game for a long time and should really take a break, which, again, completely true, I actually listened. I mean, it was really late, and I would have much preferred continuing on when it was light out, teenage machismo be damned. As I mentioned, the calls just devolve into utter nonsense, but not in like the XD holds up spork so random quirky way, more like a guy muttering to himself on the subway at 2 a.m. way. The Colonel will launch into these tirades about his divorce settlement, botany, reincarnation, and his intense desire for scissors, among other equally unrelated things.
I need scissors. 61.
On occasion, he'll talk as if he's still giving directives regarding Snake's missions in previous games, so it's especially trippy to hear him talk about bosses I killed like 24 hours ago during my Metal Gear marathon. This is all partnered with the creepiest track in the series, bar none, along with the Colonel's propensity to randomly distort his face into this weird half-skeletonized version of himself. The prolonged awkward pauses and Raiden's refusal to even respond to the Colonel's insane ramblings make for what feels like a terrifying and lonely fever dream. Just a complete and total mindfuck, the likes of which I haven't really experienced ever since, and maybe that's fine. So what could possibly top that whole escapade? The Big Fish. The Big Fish from Ape Escape. And I'll note that out of every entry on the list, the Big Fish is the one I have the least vivid memories of, and yet it was one of the first things that I knew would be included. I didn't recall all the details about the Big Fish itself, I just remember the abject horror I felt as a kid when I first encountered it. Looking at it now, it's kinda doofy, but I can't just ignore my gut reaction here. I distinctly remember playing Ape Escape 1 with my mom, but whenever she wasn't around, I'd try and venture further into the game to catch monkeys on my own. Due to the unorthodox control scheme, we didn't make it very far when we played together, but when I did make it to level 4, the thick jungle, I straight up stopped playing because of the Big Fish. Like, did not return to Ape Escape for several years because of the Big Fish. I don't even have a ton to say, I think it pretty much speaks for itself. Thing is, it doesn't even eat you or anything, it shocks you with electricity if you get too close, and you can completely circumvent that by just getting in the rowboat, which makes you entirely immune. But it just wasn't enough at the time. To be honest, it's still not enough. The Big Fish took so much from me, so much time I could have spent catching monkeys. Anyway, that's all I've got. They're not always going to be big existential mindfucks. Sometimes it's just Big Fish. Alright, finally made it to the Kingdom Hearts stuff. That's what the people want. I'm already on record talking about this moment, as well as a handful of other unsettling things from the first Kingdom Hearts, and I gotta say, there's some stiff competition from just the first few hours of KH1 alone. I mean, I count my blessings that I first played the game with family nearby, otherwise I think Darkside in the Dive to the Heart would have turned me off from the game indefinitely. Who knows where I'd be right now? I could be making 6 figures. Or 5 figures. I'm kidding, I'm mostly kidding. patreon.com/regularpat. There's also the Destiny Islands Apocalypse, where Sora is armed with a useless wooden sword as the shadows attack, a sequence that literally had me crying for regular dad. As you can see, he's still playing through this part for me nearly 20 years later. Another serious contender is the Shadow Infestation in the usually safe and peaceful 1st District in Traverse Town when you're still Donald and Goofyless and getting your bearings in this new and unfamiliar world. I know that many of us were very young when we first played KH1, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that it's the scariest game in the series, if only by default. And sure, there are scary things that happen in other games in the series and heavy concepts being explored, but the dire atmosphere in KH1 remains unparalleled if you ask me. And the man who showed us that this game was not about to be a Disney pleasure cruise was none other than brown-robed Ansem when he appeared in the secret place on the second day. God, did this guy leave an impression. A common theme throughout the list has been a fear of things you can't see but know are there, and Ansem definitely feeds into that in his own little way. Intentionally by having his face completely obscured, and unintentionally by being in a dark room in a PS2 game from 2002 that I played on a shitty CRT. Like, I don't know about you folks, but I wasn't even 100% sure that there was an actual physical entity in there with Sora. I was like, is he still dreaming? We need to get Kairi over here to hit him in the head, because I definitely knew that was something that she did. It's funny because most of these moments are scariest the first time you observe them, but Ansem was actually the opposite for me. My parents or cousins or whoever were definitely around the first time we got to this scene, so it was only mildly unsettling. But knowing that it was coming on subsequent and ill-fated childhood playthroughs and being unable to avoid it made it much, much worse. The thing is, it's so early and there's no way to skirt around it, and if you're thinking, just skip the cutscene.
Not Clayton! Everlasting darkness!
You couldn't. That was a luxury that was not afforded to us back on the PS2. The best thing I could do was use the time to go and grab a juice box and then cower behind the couch until the bad man was gone. I think I really can't be blamed for being spooked by this though. I mean, they knew what they were doing. He's a faceless man with a voice deeper than Atlantica, dropping philosophy on and insulting the intelligence of both Sora and the player. I'd stand by my fear. In fact, I'll kick it back to my dad and I for final thoughts on this.
Yeah, this is scary.
This is why I couldn't play the game by myself. It's dark and I'm
very
alone.
scary.
Yeah.
Scares me.
Yeah.
I think Sora just shit himself, but
yeah. And of course, before we get to number 1, gotta have a few honorable mentions. The Hall of Spooky also-rans. We've got the spiders in the high caves from Spyro the Dragon, specifically the original. I think they're way scarier when they're all pointy and jagged. In that same vein, there's the gear grinders from Hurricos in Spyro 2, especially their creepy laughs partnered with the blaring alarm. You can also throw in the mechanical sharks in Aquaria Towers from the same game, didn't care for those at all. This one's so dumb, but in Mole Mania for the original Game Boy, there was this old mole who would give you hearts, but if you kept talking to him, he'd get all mad at you for being greedy, and then he'd just fucking kill you, clawing you to death, I guess, so didn't like that. And while we're on Game Boy, I mean Lavender Town, of course, that's like the godfather of scary moments in kids games. And last one, the Water Wraith from Pikmin 2. No real surprise there, a big malevolent and faceless entity chasing me through dark tunnels. That's a big turnoff for me. Okay, now we've arrived at our final destination. Not capital F, capital D, final destination, that's actually where we started. But what was it that inspired the most raw terror in me as a child gamer? Well, it came from Rayman, of course. No, not this Rayman. This is Rayman 1. Honestly, it's probably the scariest game I've ever played because it's just the most unfair, difficult bullshit despite how pretty it looks and how good the music is. But this guy and this guy, they are not the same. No, for this, we're going to the grittier and more fisticuffs heavy Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc. Another really fun and underrated platformer from my childhood and naturally a source of night terrors. To set the stage, Rayman is a fucking badass in this game. He punches the hoodlums and he doesn't afraid of anything. Every problem you run into that has a face in this game can be solved by punching said face. The first 4 worlds exist as a playground for Rayman to punch his enemies in. Men, women, and children all cower at the sight of his helicopter hair and his lack of limbs. Rayman has come to town and his mood is best described as punch-like. But this all changes at World 5, the Desert of the Canaran. Now, upon arrival, the place looks a little foreboding, but in fairness, the world before this was called the Land of the Livid Dead, and it was actually beautiful and one of the most pleasant locations in the franchise. And sure, there's sand that burns to the touch and a big skull cave and like a double blood moon, but whatever, don't be a baby. Inside that cave is some typical platforming fare, a couple of low-tier grunt enemies, business as usual. But then you get a cutscene where you're informed of the true nature of the shit-filled creek you've waded into, utterly paddleless. The teensies here warn you that the only way through this desert is by using the network of underground tunnels which are infested with the local Kinaren, thick armored beasts that cannot be defeated or even harmed, and if they get their hands on you, they will kill you. Like kill, with a K and an L. Now I'm thinking, yeah, sure thing, I've yet to meet someone I cannot diplomatically negotiate with through the power of punching. I mean, I've had to fight enemies with big pieces of armor, I just grab one of the various power-ups to turn my fist into a rocket or put spikes on my hands, that always does the trick. But when they said invincible, they meant invincible. After a bit more playing, another cutscene starts where your sidekick Glowbox is captured, the music starts losing its mind, and the Kinaren finally reveal themselves. And I think they're best described as like bipedal, intelligent dinosaur guys. They intimidate their prey with these visceral roars, but they also say shit like stick bamboo under his nails, or tear off his flesh, or make him write bad checks. Those are all real things they say. Spit in his eye, let him run, meat tastes better when salted, and I am 7, mind you, this is E for everyone.
Tear off his brain. Fresh brain.
So, at the point where I'm thrown into these dark and twisty tunnels filled to the brim with Kinaren, I am begging my dad to play through this part for me. You are indeed entirely powerless against the Kinaren. The game even gives you several power-ups when you're first introduced to them, like, yeah, here, give it a shot, see how that works out for you, you frightened little moron. And they will do nary a shred of damage. In fact, if you get hit by the Kinaren enough, the game will actually freeze, cut the music, and one of the teensies from earlier will show up and basically scold you for getting your ass kicked.
Little grasshopper, one must never let the Kinarens get near you. Capiche? Never!
I think the game thinks it's being helpful, but this also scared me, like I'm in trouble for playing the game badly. In reality, those power-ups are intended to be used to solve puzzles to maneuver around the Kinaren instead of maneuvering your fists into their torsos like you've become so accustomed to by this point. The Kinaren are drawn to the sound of gongs, so you're supposed to use your rocket-powered fist to hit them from afar, draw them out of your way, and then sneak through safely, but it's hard to do that with a ton of finesse when your hands are shaking and your legs are soaked in urine. And this is like the bulk of the world, by the way, just an absolute roadblock for my child psyche. There was no doing this on my own. Ironically, there's a boss toward the end of the world, a Kinaren warrior named Reflux who wields this big magic scepter, and you can damage him just fine, but for whatever reason, the mooks who patrol the tunnels brush off your attacks like a light breeze. It was definitely empowering when I was finally able to wallop a member of this buff lizard clan, but good god, I had never and I think have not since felt so powerless in a video game. It's honestly a masterclass in instilling that very specific type of fear. The way the game builds Rayman up as this unstoppable action hero and then takes all of that away halfway through the adventure for like several hours of playtime is so expertly and evilly done. The Kinaren are responsible for several save files rotting away on my PS2 memory card that abruptly stop at World 4 Level 6, and for good reason. But if you can get past this, you're treated to another half of the game where you just punch stuff, so it's always darkest before the dawn. Boo! Oh geez, wow, what a frightening, spooky Halloween special! Hope you enjoy. A little different than usual. I thought maybe we'd spice things up for the Halloween season. Let me know if we shared any of these fears in common, or let me know your own spooky sources of video game trauma down there in the comments. As always, feel free to check me out anywhere that I've spread myself throughout the internet. Actually, if you go to regularpat.com, it'll take you to a link tree with all of my different places, so if you're not sure, just regularpat.com, that'll do it for you. Recently attended a panhandling seminar, and I found that the most effective way to solicit money from strangers over the internet is through song. So, if you like the content you see, please consider moneying me. Pledge to me on Patreon, and I will not starve to death. This is Halloween. Again, thank you for watching. Enjoy this fan art, as well as this list of lovely patrons who help make all of this nonsense possible. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.